A tech mogul is approached by a child claiming to be the son of his long-lost brother, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He uncovers that his brother had uncovered a scandal involving their own family business. He discovered his brother continues to influence the family business in the wrong way. The grand ballroom of the Parkview Hotel glittered with the chatter and clinking glasses of New York City's tech elite. At the center, under the crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic light across tuxedos and evening gowns, stood Robert Kingsley, the CEO of Kingsley Tech. His sharp suit and commanding presence drew eyes and whispers. Tonight, he was more than just a businessman. He was a beacon of success, having steered his company into the forefront of the tech industry. As waiters navigated the sea of wealthy patrons with trays of champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres, Robert's eyes were on the lookout for potential investors, even as he exchanged pleasantries. The gala, while a celebration of Kingsley Tech's latest achievements, was also a battlefield of wits and influence. Suddenly, a slight tug at his sleeve drew Robert from his reverie. He looked down to see a young boy, no more than 10, dressed in a simple, somewhat worn suit, staring up at him with an intensity that belied his years. "Mr. Kingsley," the boy said, his voice clear over the hum of conversations. "My name is Ethan, and I need to talk to you. It's about my father, your brother, Marcus." The name sent a chill through Robert's spine. Marcus had vanished 5 years ago, leaving a wound in the family that had never healed. How this child knew Marcus, let alone his relation to Robert, was a mystery that demanded attention. Robert guided Ethan to a quieter corner, his mind racing with questions. "How do you know about Marcus?" he asked, keeping his voice even despite the turmoil inside. Ethan looked around nervously before responding. "He was my dad. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should find you. He said you were the only person he trusted with this." With a skeptical raise of his eyebrow, Robert processed this information. Marcus had never mentioned a son. Yet, the sincerity in Ethan's eyes was hard to dismiss outright. "What exactly are you saying happened to Marcus?" Robert inquired, a part of him not sure he wanted the answer. He found something bad, something dangerous about Kingsley Tech. He tried to tell someone, but then he disappeared," Ethan whispered, barely audible. His gaze flitted around the room as if expecting someone to overhear. Robert's initial skepticism wavered as he saw genuine fear in the boy's eyes. This wasn't just a child's overactive imagination. "Do you have any proof of what you're saying?" he asked, his voice now laced with a growing concern. Ethan fidgeted, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "He left this for you, said it's all in here." Taking the envelope, Robert felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. If what Ethan claimed was true, this wasn't just a family matter, but something that could affect the very foundation of his company. "Let's take this somewhere more private. Follow me," Robert decided, his protective instincts kicking in as he glanced around the room. Whoever might be involved in Marcus's disappearance could still be watching. As they moved toward the exit, Robert's mind was a whirlwind. The return of his brother's shadow to his life was as disquieting as it was sudden, but the immediate priority was to protect this child who had unexpectedly become his charge. After leaving the clamor of the gala behind, Robert escorted Ethan to his private office in the Kingsley Tech building, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Parkview Hotel. The room was sleek, modern, with views of the city skyline that usually brought Robert a sense of accomplishment. Tonight, however, the glittering lights felt more like watchful eyes, monitoring his every move. Once inside, Robert carefully opened the envelope Ethan had given him. It contained a series of documents, emails, memos, and a few cryptic notes that alluded to financial discrepancies and unapproved projects within Kingsley Tech. The handwriting on the notes was unmistakably Marcus's. Ethan watched quietly from a leather couch, clutching a small backpack that seemed to contain all his worldly possessions. He said he was going to meet someone about this the day he disappeared, Ethan murmured, his voice tinged with a mix of fear and sadness. Robert sat down across from him, the documents laid out on his desk. "Did he tell you who he was meeting with?" he asked, scanning the boy's face for any sign of recognition. Ethan shook his head. "No, but he was really scared. He said if anything happened to him, I should give you those and hide." The responsibility of the situation weighed heavily on Robert. Not only did he need to protect Ethan, but he also had to delve deeper into the implications of the documents. It was clear that Marcus had uncovered something potentially ruinous for the company. "You'll stay here tonight," Robert decided, standing to arrange a room for Ethan in the company's secure quarters. "It's late, and we need to figure out our next steps in the morning." The next day, Robert arrived at his office early, having barely slept. His mind replayed his last conversation with Marcus, their argument, and the subsequent silence that lasted until Marcus's disappearance. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed signs of the impending trouble. As he sifted through the documents again, trying to piece together the scattered clues Marcus had left, his phone buzzed with a call from Julia, his assistant. "Robert, there's a situation," she said, her voice strained. "It's your access to the project files for the Phoenix Initiative. They've been revoked." Alarm bells went off in Robert's head. The Phoenix Initiative was his brainchild, a cutting-edge project set to revolutionize data security. Losing access could only mean one thing: someone was trying to cut him off at the knees. "Who authorized this?" he demanded, a hard edge to his tone. "There's no record of the authorization. It's like you were never part of the project," Julia replied, confusion evident in her voice. Robert rubbed his temples, frustration mounting. This wasn't just corporate sabotage, it was personal. He needed to act quickly. "Get me the security footage from last night, and check if anyone else has had unusual access to my projects." As Julia hung up to fulfill his requests, Robert's gaze settled on the city below. The rising sun did little to warm the chill that had settled inside him. Someone in his own company betrayed him, and he suspected that Marcus's disappearance was only the tip of the iceberg. He leaned back in his chair, thoughts racing. Every employee, every project, every deal, he would have to scrutinize everything and everyone. Trust, once unshakable, now had to be earned. His company, his life's work, depended on it. As the morning unfolded into a chaotic whirl of calls and meetings, Robert's office became a command center for damage control. Julia managed to secure the security footage, which showed an unknown figure accessing Robert's office late at night. The figure was hooded, making identification impossible, but the deliberate manner in which they navigated the building suggested they knew exactly what they were looking for. "You look at the way they move, Julia," Robert pointed out as they watched the grainy footage. "This person knew the camera positions. They've done this before, or they were told about them." Julia nodded, her face set in a grim line. "I'll cross-reference this with the employee access logs. Whoever did this might have slipped up somewhere." Meanwhile, Robert took a deeper dive into the documents Ethan had provided. The numbers didn't lie. There were discrepancies in the financial reports of the Phoenix Initiative. Funds had been diverted, and inexplicably, some of the project's critical data had been exported out of the secure network. As he pieced together Marcus's notes, a picture began to form, one of calculated internal sabotage. The implications were severe. Not only was the project at risk, but the entire company could suffer if these revelations went public. Robert knew he needed to tread carefully. Whoever was behind this had significant power and reach within Kingsley Tech. His next steps had to be strategic. Julia set up a discreet meeting with the board. Robert instructed after they finished reviewing the footage. It's time we brought this to their attention carefully. Late in the afternoon, Robert met with the board of directors in a secure conference room. The atmosphere was tense as he laid out the evidence, keeping the details sparse to protect Ethan and Marcus's deeper involvement for now. The board members listened intently, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. After the meeting, Robert stayed behind to ponder his next move. The room was silent, the gravity of the situation settling around him like a heavy cloak. That's when Julia walked back in, closing the door softly behind her. "Robert, there's something I haven't told you," she began, her voice hesitant. "Before Marcus disappeared, he came to me. He was frightened, said he was onto something big and dangerous. He didn't give me details, but he asked me to watch your back." Surprised, Robert looked at her, reassessing his long-time assistant. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I didn't know if I could trust anyone with this information," Julia admitted. Marcus was paranoid, scared. "I thought he might be overreacting, until now." This revelation shifted something between them. Trust, once implicit, had frayed, but in its place, a new bond formed, forged in the fires of current crises. "Thank you for coming forward now," Robert said, his voice steady. "I need all the help I can get, and I trust you, Julia, more than ever." Together, they began to strategize. Julia's loyalty and her insight into Marcus's fears were invaluable. She could act as his eyes and ears within the company, a necessary ally in the shadowy war they were about to wage. "I'll start by digging deeper into the employee records and communications. If there's a leak or an accomplice, I'll find them," Julia promised, her determination clear. As she left to begin her investigation, Robert turned back to the window, looking over the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the buildings, a visual echo of the darkening situation he found himself in. With Julia's help, he hoped to bring everything to light. Later that evening, as the city's lights blinked alive one by one, Robert's personal phone vibrated with an incoming message that drew his attention away from the sprawling night view. The message was terse, a cold slice through the evening's quiet. "Stop digging or consequences will follow." Chillingly, the message was not signed, nor did it indicate its origin from any recognizable number. The threat, however vague, was clear enough. Robert's investigations into the company's inner workings were not going unnoticed, and the stakes were rapidly escalating. Rather than retreat, however, the message steeled Robert's resolve. He forwarded the message to Julia with a note: "Increase security protocols. It's not just corporate secrets at risk anymore." With a deep sigh, Robert reflected on the irony of his situation. Kingsley Tech, a giant in security technology, was now the playground for a hidden adversary within its own ranks. He realized that his moves from this point forward needed to be both bold and cautious. The rest of the night was spent in his home office, reviewing every interaction, every project update, and financial report related to the Phoenix initiative over the past year. He knew he was looking for a needle in a haystack, but every clue counted. As he worked, his thoughts periodically drifted to Ethan, now under the protective watch of the company's security team. The boy's safety was paramount. He was the last living link Robert had to Marcus, and possibly to understanding the full scope of the threat they faced. Morning brought no relief to the tension that had settled over Robert like a heavy shroud. If anything, the daylight hours seemed to magnify the sense of urgency that had gripped him since Ethan's arrival. With his first cup of coffee barely touched, Robert received a call from Julia, her tone urgent. "And I've found something," she said without preamble. "It's big, Robert. The security logs for the server room show unauthorized access dating back months. The access codes used belong to senior management, codes that should never be outside a very select group. Robert's grasp tightened around his phone. Can you tell who used them? Not yet, Julia admitted. But I've narrowed it down to 3 possible insiders. I'm pulling their files and recent communications now. Good, keep me updated, Robert replied, his mind racing. This breach wasn't just a random act. It was orchestrated by someone with significant power within the company. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls as Robert tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. Behind the scenes, however, he and Julia were pulling at the threads of a conspiracy that seemed to reach deep into the roots of Kingsley Tech. By late afternoon, with storm clouds gathering ominously outside his office windows, Robert convened a small, trusted team to discuss their findings and prepare for the potential fallout. This team consisted of Julia, his chief of security, and his legal advisor. Together, they outlined a plan to isolate the breach, secure the company's data, and prepare for any legal battles that might ensue. As the meeting adjourned, Robert felt the weight of leadership more acutely than ever. The company he had built from the ground up was under threat from within, and the next steps he took would determine its fate. He was no stranger to adversity, but this was different. This was personal. As dusk settled over the city, casting long shadows against the sleek lines of Kingsley Tech's headquarters, Robert remained in his office, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and suspicions. He kept revisiting the security footage, the unauthorized access records, and Julia's latest updates, trying to connect the dots that seemed frustratingly elusive. His concentration was abruptly shattered by an urgent knock on his door. It was Julia, her face pale, her usual composure shaken. "Robert, Ethan's gone," she blurted out as soon as he opened the door. "His room was empty during the routine check just now. Security is sweeping the building, but there's no sign of him yet." A cold dread gripped Robert's heart. Could he have left on his own? He asked, though the pit of his stomach told him otherwise. "It's possible, but unlikely," Julia responded, pulling up a digital layout of the building on her tablet. "All exits are monitored, and he hasn't been seen on any camera since 2 hours ago." Robert paced the length of his office, frustration and fear mounting with each step. He stopped abruptly, a memory flashing through his mind, an old photo of him and Marcus at a little-known city park they had frequented as kids. It was their secret haven, a place they had last visited together just before Marcus vanished. "Check the cameras for the back service entrance that faces the alley. He might have slipped out there," he suggested, a sudden hunch forming. Within minutes, Julia confirmed his suspicion. "There's footage of Ethan heading towards the alley. He seemed to be alone and in quite a hurry. Keep the team on high alert and expand the search to that area." "I'll head there now myself," Robert decided, grabbing his coat. The park wasn't far, and if Ethan was retracing a childhood memory, he might be trying to tell Robert something important. The park was quiet, the onset of night muting the usual sounds of city life. Robert walked along the familiar paths, his thoughts clouded with worry for Ethan and the implications of his sudden disappearance. As he reached the old oak tree where he and Marcus had carved their initials decades ago, he saw Ethan. The boy was sitting on a swing, his small figure almost swallowed up by the darkness. "Ethan?" Robert called softly, not wanting to startle him. The boy looked up, his eyes reflecting a mix of relief and fear. "I had to come here," Ethan said as Robert drew closer. "Dad talked about this place. He said if I ever really needed to understand, I should come here and wait for you." Robert sat down on the adjacent swing, the rusty chains creaking under his weight. "Understand what, Ethan?" he asked gently. "The truth about why he had to leave. He hid something here, something important. He was going to show it to you the day he disappeared." Together, they searched the area around the old oak tree. Hidden in a hollow of the trunk, protected by a small, unassuming stone, they found a weathered USB drive, Marcus's final secret. As they left the park, the city's skyline loomed large before them. Robert knew that the contents of the USB could contain the answers to many of his questions, or it could unleash further threats they had yet to anticipate. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but now, with Ethan by his side, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. With the first episode reaching its conclusion at this pivotal moment, Robert's journey had only just begun. His company, his family's legacy, and his brother's mysterious fate all hung in the balance. The early morning light filtered weakly through the blinds of Robert's office, casting long shadows across the floor. Despite the revelations of the previous night, there was no time to pause. The hunt for the truth behind Marcus's disappearance and the corporate sabotage continued unabated. With Ethan safely back and the mysterious USB in hand, Robert felt a step closer to unraveling the tangled web of deceit surrounding his company. Before diving into the USB's contents, Robert decided to tighten security around Ethan and fortify his own defenses. He met with his security team, laying out strict protocols and ensuring that Ethan would be under constant surveillance, albeit discreetly. "No detail is too small, no measure too strict," he instructed, his voice firm with the weight of responsibility. Meanwhile, Julia worked to trace the origins of the unauthorized access within the company, her eyes flickering across screens filled with data and logs. Her workstation was a hive of activity, her focus absolute as she sifted through digital footprints that might lead them to the mole within Kingsley Tech. While Julia pursued the digital intruders, Robert decided it was time to examine the USB drive. In the quiet of his office, he inserted the device into his computer, his heartbeat echoing in his ears as files began to appear on the screen. There were videos, documents, and audio recordings, all meticulously organized and dated. The first file was a video of Marcus, looking tired and worried, but resolute. "If you're watching this, Robert, things have probably gone south. I've uncovered a scheme within Kingsley Tech. Embezzlement, data theft, you name it. It's big, and it's dangerous. I've gathered all the evidence here. Be careful who you trust." As the video played, Robert felt a chill run down his spine. The brother he thought he had known, the confident and charismatic Marcus, had been fighting battles far beyond the boardroom. He spent the next hours reviewing the files, each one adding layers to the conspiracy. Marcus had documented meetings, recorded conversations, and compiled financial records that painted a damning picture of high-level corruption. It was a labyrinthine plot that threatened not just the financial stability of Kingsley Tech, but its very soul. With each document, Robert's resolve hardened. He needed to expose the traitors, for Marcus's sake and for the future of his company. But he also knew he had to move carefully. The enemies were close, possibly watching his every move. The revelations from Marcus's files sent shockwaves through Robert's understanding of his own company. As he processed the information, it became clear that the conspiracy was not the work of a lone wolf. It involved several key players in the company, including some he had once trusted implicitly. Back in the office, the atmosphere was tense as Robert convened a discreet meeting with his closest advisors, minus any that he now suspected. The air was thick with urgency as he laid out the evidence, watching the reactions closely. Betrayal had left its mark, and trust was now a commodity in short supply. "Everyone in this room is here because I believe you are loyal to both me and the company," Robert began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We are facing a serious breach, not only of security but of trust. Our task is to root out the corruption without tipping off those involved more than they already are." As the team strategized, Julia entered with fresh information. She had managed to trace the unauthorized access back to a small group within the IT department, all hired over the past 2 years, and all with unusually close ties to one of the board members Robert now suspected of being involved in the conspiracy. The fracture lines within Kingsley Tech were deepening, and as the storm gathered, Robert knew that each move they made had to be calculated with the utmost care. With the identities of several conspirators now suspected, Robert and his team initiated covert surveillance on those individuals, using the very technology Kingsley Tech was famed for. This was a game of cloak and dagger, played within the mirrored halls of corporate power. Meanwhile, Robert decided to take a more hands-on approach with one particular aspect of the conspiracy, the financial irregularities. He met secretly with the company's chief financial officer, Linda, who had always been forthright and whom he still trusted. Together, they pored over financial statements and transfer records, tracing the embezzled funds, which seemed to vanish into shadow accounts and then reappear in offshore havens. "It looks like they've been funneling money out of the company for at least 2 years," Linda explained, highlighting columns of figures on her screen. "It's sophisticated, hidden behind fake contracts and shell companies." As they worked, Robert felt the dual weight of betrayal and responsibility. The company he had built from the ground up was being undermined from within, and the path to reclaiming it was fraught with risks. Outside of the financial forensics, Robert knew that public exposure was their best weapon against the corruption. But to wield it effectively, he needed undeniable proof that would stand up not only in the court of public opinion, but also in actual court, should it come to that. Each piece of data, each recorded conversation, was another step towards that goal. As the day faded into evening, the pieces of the puzzle were slowly fitting together, forming a clearer picture of the rot within Kingsley Tech. Robert knew that the coming confrontation was inevitable. It was no longer just about salvaging the company's finances or reputation. It was about justice, about rooting out the poison that had infiltrated the very heart of his life's work. The work was meticulous and draining. As Robert and Linda unearthed more evidence of financial misconduct, the scope of the betrayal became even more staggering. Each document painted a clearer picture of the greed and deception that had taken root within the upper echelons of Kingsley Tech. It wasn't just about money, it was a power play, one that threatened to topple everything Robert had built. Later that day, in a secure room lined with non-disclosure agreements and a sense of imminent threat, Robert met with his legal team to discuss the ramifications of going public. The lawyers laid out the potential fallout, from stock market shocks and investor lawsuits to criminal charges against the conspirators. It was a legal minefield, but Robert was resolute. We go full transparency," he declared. "It's the only way to regain trust and control." The meeting ended with tasks assigned and strategies set. Robert's next step was to prepare for the internal fallout. Before going public, he wanted to confront the board members he now knew were involved. It would be a showdown, albeit a carefully orchestrated one. The preparation for the board meeting was like gearing up for battle. Robert rehearsed his presentation, backed by incontrovertible evidence and bolstered by legal advisories. He knew the meeting would be explosive. The accused were powerful, with deep ties and deeper pockets. But he also knew that the element of surprise was on his side. On the morning of the meeting, the boardroom felt more like a courtroom. The implicated board members walked in with their usual confidence, unaware of the storm that was about to break. As they settled around the table, Robert began, his voice calm but underlaid with a steely resolve. "As CEO, it is my duty to address any issues that threaten our company's integrity and future," he started, clicking to the first slide of his presentation, which outlined the financial discrepancies. The room tensed immediately, the board members exchanging nervous glances as the evidence unfolded. Halfway through the presentation, one of the implicated members, Alan, tried to interrupt. "This is absurd, Robert. You're accusing your colleagues based on what?" some numbers taken out of context. His defiance was palpable, but so was his panic. Robert let him speak, then replied coolly, "Not out of context, Alan. Out of our company's accounts." He clicked to a recording, a conversation between Alan and another board member discussing the laundering scheme. The room fell silent, the gravity of the betrayal settling like dust after an explosion. The meeting ended with security escorting the implicated board members out. It was a decisive move, one that would either save or doom Kingsley Tech. As they left, Robert felt a mix of victory and profound sadness. These were colleagues he had once trusted, friends he had worked with for years. With the board shaken but cleansed, Robert prepared for the next phase, public disclosure. It would be the hardest part yet, admitting to the world that his company had harbored corruption at its highest levels. But it was necessary, a cathartic purge that would either renew the company's foundations or break them completely. As the aftershocks of the boardroom confrontation rippled through Kingsley Tech, Robert prepared for the next crucial step, forming an external alliance. Knowing the battle wasn't just internal, he reached out to Cynthia Adams, a well-respected tech industry watchdog known for her rigorous defense of corporate ethics. Her support would not only lend credibility to his efforts to clean house, but also help navigate the public relations storm that was sure to follow. Robert met with Cynthia at a quiet cafe away from the prying eyes of the media and the industry. He laid out everything, from the initial discovery of the financial discrepancies to the recent boardroom upheaval. Cynthia listened intently, her expression grave. "This goes deeper than just financial fraud, doesn't it?" she observed, sipping her coffee. "Yes," Robert admitted, "it's about a culture of corruption that's been allowed to fester for too long. I want to root it out completely, but I need help." Cynthia nodded, understanding the magnitude of the task. "I'll stand with you, Robert, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because the tech industry needs a wake-up call. We'll start with a joint press conference. Go public, controlled but transparent. It's time to clean house." With Cynthia's alliance secured, Robert felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but now, with a powerful advocate by his side, the journey seemed a bit less daunting. Energized by the new alliance, Robert returned to his office to plan the next steps. The joint press conference would be critical. It needed to be executed flawlessly to reassure investors, stakeholders, and the public that Kingsley Tech was committed to transparency and integrity. Julia worked closely with Robert to organize the event, coordinating with Cynthia's team to ensure the message was unified and impactful. They decided on a venue, prepared press kits, and drafted speeches that conveyed both the gravity of the situation and a clear path forward. The day of the press conference arrived with a flurry of activity. Cameras flashed as Robert and Cynthia stepped up to the podium, their faces set with determination. As the crowd settled, Robert took the lead, his voice steady. Today, we are here to disclose a situation that has been both challenging and enlightening for us at Kingsley Tech," he began, detailing the discovery of the fraud, the measures taken to address it, and the commitment to rebuilding trust. Cynthia then took over, reinforcing Robert's points and expanding on the broader implications for the tech industry. "This is not just about one company," she declared. "This is about setting a standard for transparency and accountability that should define our industry." The conference concluded with a Q&A session where Robert and Cynthia addressed concerns with a candidness that was well received by the audience. The initial media coverage was cautiously optimistic, and the stock market response was more stable than expected, a testament to the effectiveness of their approach. As Robert watched the news coverage later that day, a sense of cautious optimism took hold. The tide was turning, perhaps not yet a wave of change, but the ripples were there, moving outward, signaling the start of something new, something better. With public sentiment cautiously swaying in their favor, Robert knew the next step was crucial: securing the internal stability of Kingsley Tech. Despite the successful press conference, the real battle to root out all remnants of corruption within the company loomed large. He needed to set a trap for any other conspirators who had yet to reveal themselves. Robert and Julia planned a strategic board meeting to discuss the future direction of the Phoenix Initiative, the project at the heart of the scandal. They intentionally leaked misinformation about a supposed new development in the project, designed to attract the interest of any remaining conspirators within the company. As the meeting day approached, security measures were discreetly tightened. Julia monitored communications closely, looking for any spike in activity that the leaked information might trigger. Sure enough, the bait attracted attention. Several suspicious transactions and unauthorized access attempts were detected, tracing back to a small group within the R&D department. During the meeting, Robert watched carefully as he introduced the fictional project development. He noted the reactions of the attendees, particularly those who seemed overly interested or who asked probing questions. After the meeting, he and Julia reviewed the security footage and communication logs, confirming their suspicions about several individuals. With enough evidence gathered, Robert took swift action. He arranged for the immediate suspension of the implicated staff and initiated a thorough investigation into their activities. This decisive move sent a clear message throughout the company. The era of overlooking shady dealings was over. With the conspirators exposed and the cleanup of the company underway, Robert felt a momentary relief. However, the full extent of the betrayal hit home when he confronted one of the senior conspirators, Martin Reeves, a longtime colleague who had been with Kingsley Tech since its inception. The confrontation took place in Robert's office, away from the eyes of the company, a private showdown between former allies. "Martin, why?" Robert asked, the weight of betrayal heavy in his voice. "You were there from the start. You helped build this company. How could you let this happen?" Martin, his composure cracking, struggled to maintain eye contact. "It started small, Robert, just a few discrepancies we thought we could correct before anyone noticed. But then it grew, out of control, and there was too much at stake." As Martin spoke, Robert realized the corruption had not been born out of pure greed, but from a series of small compromises that had spiraled into a vast conspiracy. This understanding didn't excuse the actions, but it painted a complex picture of human frailty. The conversation ended with Martin being escorted out by security, his career and reputation in ruins. Robert sat alone in his office long after Martin had left, reflecting on the painful but necessary actions he had taken. He knew that rebuilding the company and its culture would be his biggest challenge yet. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across his office, Robert looked out at the skyline. The challenges ahead were daunting, but he felt ready to face them. Kingsley Tech would rise from this stronger, more resilient, and more ethical. The path forward was clear, and it was one he would tread with unwavering commitment. The day of the final showdown had arrived, and with it, a palpable tension that permeated the entire headquarters of Kingsley Tech. Robert began the morning in his office, reviewing every detail of the strategy he had painstakingly crafted to ensure today's board meeting would decisively end the battle against the internal corruption that had plagued his company. Armed with the last pieces of evidence uncovered in the recent operations, Robert felt a mixture of anticipation and solemnity. Today's actions would not only determine the future of Kingsley Tech, but would also seal his legacy as its leader. He knew the importance of the decisions he would make and the words he would speak. As he walked to the boardroom, he mentally rehearsed his speech, focusing on the themes of renewal, responsibility, and forward thinking. The boardroom, usually a place of strategic discussions and financial reviews, had been transformed into a battleground where the future of the company would be determined. As the board members gathered, the air was thick with unspoken thoughts and veiled glances. Robert opened the meeting by addressing the elephant in the room, the series of scandals that had rocked the foundation of Kingsley Tech. He laid out the evidence of corruption, the steps taken to address it, and the impacts it had on all stakeholders. The presentation was meticulous, displaying not just the financial losses, but the damage to trust within the company and the industry at large. Robert's voice was firm, his demeanor unyielding as he spoke of the painful but necessary steps taken to cleanse the company's ranks. However, the meeting took a turn when a board member, previously silent, raised a point about the unintended consequences of Robert's purges. While your actions have indeed rooted out the corruption, they have also left us vulnerable, he argued. We've lost valuable personnel, client trust is shaky, and our stock has taken a hit. How do you propose we recover from this collateral damage? Robert acknowledged the concerns with a nod. The recovery will not be instant, he admitted. It will require hard work, transparency, and a recommitment to our core values. We must rebuild trust not with words, but with consistent, ethical actions. As the discussion unfolded, it became clear that the path to recovery would be arduous. The company had been saved, but the landscape had changed. Now, more than ever, Kingsley Tech needed to innovate not only technologically, but ethically. After the intense board meeting, Robert took a moment to reflect on the emotional toll the entire ordeal had taken. Not only had he lost colleagues and friends to betrayals, but the trust that once underpinned his professional relationships was deeply fractured. It was a loss that couldn't be quantified by financial reports or remediation plans. To begin the healing process, Robert initiated a series of team-building sessions and open forums within the company. He wanted to create a space where open communication could flourish and where the wounds inflicted by secrecy and betrayal could begin to heal. These forums were met with mixed emotions. Some employees were skeptical, while others were eager to move forward. As Robert listened to the concerns and hopes of his team, he realized that mending these broken bonds would require time and patience. He pledged to be more accessible, more transparent, and to foster an environment where ethical conduct was celebrated and rewarded. In parallel to rebuilding internal trust, Robert faced the daunting task of managing the external fallout from the scandal. Investors were nervous, and the public's perception of Kingsley Tech was more critical than ever. Robert decided to launch a series of public outreach initiatives, including partnerships with tech schools and non-profits focused on ethical business practices, to demonstrate the company's commitment to positive community impact. He also oversaw the creation of a new department within Kingsley Tech dedicated to corporate ethics and compliance. This wasn't just a cosmetic addition, it was a fundamental change in how the company would operate going forward. The department was tasked with ensuring all company operations adhered to the highest standards of integrity and with educating staff on the importance of ethical decision-making. As these initiatives began to take shape, Robert saw the first signs of positive change. Client feedback slowly turned more favorable, and a few previous clients who had severed ties began to show interest in reconnecting. It was clear that the road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in many months, Robert felt hopeful about the future. With the internal and external measures in place, Robert finally had a moment to breathe and plan for the future. The company he would rebuild wouldn't just be different in terms of personnel or policy, but fundamentally transformed in its values and vision. With the foundations for a revitalized company culture laid and external relations beginning to improve, Robert now focused on what had always been the heart of Kingsley Tech: innovation. The Phoenix Initiative, once a source of turmoil, was revitalized, becoming a symbol of the company's resurgence and commitment to leading-edge ethical technology. Robert gathered his top engineers and product developers for a series of brainstorming sessions aimed at redefining the project's goals. He emphasized the importance of transparency and ethical considerations in every stage of development, wanting the Phoenix Initiative to set a new industry standard for responsible innovation. As the project picked up steam, Robert noticed a renewed vigor among his team. There was a sense of purpose that had been missing during the darker days of scandal. News of the project's revival and its new ethical underpinnings started to make waves in tech circles, slowly restoring confidence among stakeholders and in the market. Amid the resurgence of his company's projects, Robert knew that personal reconciliation with those affected by the past year's events was crucial. He reached out to former colleagues who had left the company amid the turmoil, offering apologies and, where possible, invitations to collaborate in the future. He also made a personal visit to Marcus's family, delivering a heartfelt apology for the oversight and neglect that had, in part, led to Marcus's downfall. These were not easy conversations. They opened old wounds and required Robert to confront painful truths about his own failures as a leader and brother. Through these efforts, Robert began to mend the personal and professional relationships that had frayed. Some bridges were rebuilt stronger than before, while others, inevitably, remained in disrepair. Yet, each conversation, each apology, brought a sense of closure and peace, allowing all involved to finally move forward. As Robert reflected on these steps toward reconciliation, he realized they were essential, not just for the sake of his conscience, but for the holistic recovery of his company and community. These actions reaffirmed his commitment to change, both within Kingsley Tech and within himself. As Kingsley Tech began to stabilize and grow once again, Robert focused on broader measures of redemption, not just for the company, but for those personally affected by the scandal. He established the Kingsley Foundation, a non-profit wing of the company dedicated to supporting ethical business practices and technology education. The foundation also provided scholarships and funding for tech students from underrepresented backgrounds, aiming to give back to the community that had supported Kingsley Tech through its turmoil. Moreover, Robert implemented a company-wide volunteer program, encouraging employees to engage with local communities. This initiative not only helped mend the company's public image, but also fostered a spirit of service and responsibility among the staff. Seeing his team actively involved in these efforts filled Robert with a profound sense of pride and hope for the future. With the foundation in place and community programs running successfully, Robert took a step back to evaluate the new beginnings he had spearheaded. Kingsley Tech had transformed under his leadership from a company on the brink of collapse into a beacon of resilience and ethical responsibility. In a meeting with his leadership team, Robert laid out the next phase of the company's strategy. This phase focused not just on technological innovation and market expansion, but on maintaining and nurturing the ethical framework they had worked so hard to establish. Our commitment to ethics is not just a response to past failures, but a forward-looking vision, Robert explained. It's about setting a standard for the industry and for ourselves. As part of this new beginning, Robert also introduced more flexible work policies, including remote work options and mental health resources. Acknowledging the personal sacrifices his employees had made during the company's crisis period. He understood that the company's strength lay in its people, and their well-being was paramount. One late afternoon, as Robert walked through the newly renovated R&D department, he paused to observe a group of young engineers bustling around a new prototype. Their energy and enthusiasm were palpable, a vivid contrast to the somber days of the recent past. Reflecting on the legacy he was creating, Robert felt a profound connection to these moments. He had not only rescued his company, but had redefined its mission and impact. The mistakes of the past, while painful, had given rise to a stronger, more principled Kingsley Tech. Later that day, Robert addressed the entire company in an open town hall meeting. He spoke candidly about the journey they had undertaken, the lessons learned, and his vision for the future. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with applause echoing in the large hall. It was a reaffirmation of the trust and dedication that now characterized the company culture. As the year drew to a close, Robert stood on the rooftop of Kingsley Tech's headquarters, overlooking the city that had seen his highest highs and lowest lows. The skyline, with its myriad of lights, seemed to echo the renewed vigor of his company. That evening, as he prepared for the annual end-of-year celebration, Robert felt a sense of accomplishment and contentment. The event was more than just a party. It was a celebration of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to overcome and evolve. Surrounded by his employees, stakeholders, and even some community leaders, Robert gave a short speech. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the end of a year, but the beginning of a new chapter," he said. "Together, we've turned challenges into opportunities, and we've set new standards for ourselves and for the industry." The applause that followed was not just for Robert, but for every individual at Kingsley Tech who had contributed to its revival. As the night went on, filled with laughter and camaraderie, Robert realized that the legacy he was leaving was not just about the technology created or the profits earned, but about the community built, the lives touched, and the values upheld. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button.